Welcome to this explainer. Have you ever wondered why our government often feels completely gridlocked, yet our justice system operates in overdrive? Today, we're going to put on our scholar hats to dissect the complex machinery of the U.S. government, and we'll be examining its intended architectural design right alongside the stark sociological realities it actually produces. All right, here's our roadmap for today. We're covering 1. The architecture of power. 2. The arduous legislative process. 3. The expanding executive branch. 4. The judiciary's dual nature. And 5. Penology and systemic racism. We'll trace the gears of Congress, the presidency, and the judiciary before zooming out to analyze the profound historical outputs of this justice system. So starting with Part 1, the architecture of power balancing the branches. We have to begin with the foundational blueprint of the U.S. It's a system explicitly designed to divide and limit power. The whole goal: preventing tyranny. Anchoring this entire setup is the legislative branch, housed in the Capitol. It's designed as a bicameral representative assembly, acting as the supreme, but, deliberately slow, lawmaking institution. The framers split this power into two chambers. You got the House of Representatives, meant to be a direct pipeline for popular power, and the Senate, which was initially designed to act as a speed bump to limit that popular power and protect smaller states. Which brings us to Part 2. The arduous legislative process, the bottleneck of Congress. So how does this bicameral design actually work in practice? Well, it creates massive friction. The sheer difficulty of passing a law is honestly staggering. This arduous multi-step gauntlet, complete with those famous 24-hour Senate filibusters, was purposely engineered to slow down sweeping social changes. I mean, think about it. 85% of bills die just in committee hearings alone. And if a bill miraculously survives that, it faces intense floor debates where opponents can essentially hold the floor hostage. This intentional bottleneck means that if you want sweeping public policy changes, you absolutely need overwhelming, sustained consensus. Moving right along to Part 3, the expanding executive branch, bypassing the gridlock. Now, how does modern governance respond to all that gridlock? The contrast here is fascinating. While the framers totally intended Congress to be the one driving policy, modern presidents increasingly just bypass that bottleneck altogether. They do this by expanding their powers through legally binding executive orders and emergency declarations. You see this trajectory from FDR's New Deal policies all the way to the post-9/11 expansion of the security state. The presidency has just steadily grown. Presidents can now essentially create or dismantle federal agencies and direct policy without ever waiting for a fractured Congress to actually agree. So, what's the check on that? Well, the ultimate constitutional check against an expanding executive is the incredibly difficult process of impeachment. This is an accountability tool that was first fully deployed against Andrew Johnson way back in 1868. Now, it's really important to remember that impeachment is not a criminal trial in the standard sense. It's a political one. It requires a formal accusation by the House and a massive 2/3 conviction vote by the Senate. It's basically the architectural emergency brake on a president acting way beyond their bounds. All right, let's pivot to Part 4, the judiciary's dual nature, rights and polarization. The third branch operates as a really fascinating double-edged sword in American politics. Alexander Hamilton famously dubbed it the weakest branch because, well, it lacks the power of the purse or the military. Yet its ultimate power of judicial review dictates the very boundaries of constitutional authority. By reviewing and interpreting the law, the Supreme Court essentially substitutes its judgment for that of other institutions, effectively acting as the final umpire of the Constitution. Through landmark cases like Brown v. Board of Education, Miranda v. Arizona, Roe v. Wade, and Obergefell v. Hodges, the Supreme Court has operated as a powerful driver of progressive civil rights. It has drastically reshaped the sociological landscape of the nation, whether it was striking down the doctrine of separate but equal in public education, mandating that the accused actually be read their rights, or making same-sex marriage a fundamental right nationwide. The court has historically been a profound catalyst for societal change. The court is also the ultimate guardian of individual liberties. It famously protects even highly offensive speech under the First Amendment. This is perfectly summarized by Justice Harlan's poetic ruling, "One man's vulgarity is another's lyric." Take the Cohen v. California case, for example. A man was arrested for wearing a jacket with deeply offensive language just to protest the draft. The court actually overturned his conviction. They established a massive precedent that the government simply cannot seize upon unpopular or obnoxious words to censor viewpoints. But looking at the modern reality, we see a really significant shift: the intense partisan polarization of the court. Right now, the 10 most conservative Supreme Court justices of the past 70 years were all appointed by Republican presidents. When lifetime appointments turn legal interpretations, like the incredibly close 5-4 Citizens United decision on campaign spending, into deeply entrenched ideological battlegrounds, scholars note something pretty alarming. A justice's partisan background becomes a highly accurate predictor of their rulings. So, for many people, the court is starting to act a lot less like an impartial umpire and more like an extension of the political branches. Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, Penology and Systemic Racism, the Sociological Reality. We really have to ground these high-level political theories in harsh truth by examining the actual on-the-ground outputs of the American justice system. The data tells a really stark story here. The U.S. incarcerates people at 6 times the rate of Britain and 7 times the rate of Canada. We're talking about holding over 2.4 million people in penitentiaries and jails. That sheer volume of warehousing citizens forces us to look deeply at how the laws written by Congress and interpreted by the courts are actually being applied in the real world. Now, when you cross-reference those staggering overall rates with race, the deep, systemic disparities become absolutely undeniable. African Americans are incarcerated at 7 times the rate of whites. While African Americans make up a minority of the total U.S. population, they make up nearly 40% of the prison population. As scholars point out, to really understand this disparity, we have to look back at the history of the system itself. Tracing that evolution, we see a penological system deeply scarred by historical racism. It evolved from post-Civil War convict leasing, which was explicitly designed to control former slaves, into a modern system that's based far more on punishing and warehousing rather than any sort of actual rehabilitation. Following the civil rights gains of the 1960s, a massive tough-on-crime backlash led to super strict drug laws that disproportionately targeted minority communities. It's a clear, somewhat devastating example of how the legal architecture of a nation has direct, generational, sociological impacts. So, as we step back and look at this massive machine, from the deliberate grinding bottlenecks of Congress to the deeply flawed sociological reality of mass incarceration, we're left to ponder a pretty heavy question. Does this architecture of power truly represent the democratic will, or does it require fundamental structural reform? Is this system working exactly as intended, or is it time for a change? The framers gave us a blueprint, sure, but it's the responsibility of each new generation to inspect the building it produced. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Stay curious and keep questioning the architecture around you.